from a business perspective, a lot of times in order to start an engagement, they need a sense of how much is this going to cost, right?
Hey there, humans, and welcome to the Mutually Human podcast. Mutually Human is a custom software company out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. And this is the podcast where we talk simply about how to make technology more human. So today on the podcast, we have Lori Maxson, Director of UX. Say hello, Lori.
Hello, Lori.
Oh gosh, I knew you were gonna do that. And then we have Mark Van Holstein, CEO of Mutually Human. And I'm Josh Webb, and I'm your lovely host. Consider me like Vanna White or something like that.
Exactly.
So welcome to the podcast, everybody.
Thank you, Josh. When I look at you, that is exactly what usually goes through my head is Vanna White.
Well, you know, I'm eye candy, right? So today we're going to be talking about the cost of software, and we were just talking about game shows. It's really weird. So I'm going to call this the software Price is Right. Cue Price is Right music. Yep. I wonder if I was on key. So before we get started, I wanted to kind of to get this started by talking about a time when you thought you knew how much something should cost, and you were dramatically wrong. And I'm assuming you guys have stories like this.
I think this qualifies as a good story that fits into this, but I recently put in a pool in the backyard. And so obviously there's the pool, there's the concrete around the pool, there's landscaping, there's the fence. And we did what I thought was a really good job going through each contractor and getting good estimates for all of it so that we had a good idea of what the whole project would cost. But as you know, when you are working on a project like that and you see it starting to come to life, you say, hey, while this concrete guy is here, you're like, yeah, maybe we should make this a little bigger to fit some more tables and chairs. Or now that I see the landscaping, maybe we do want to fill in over here with a couple more bushes or add a bigger tree over there.
You're a scope
big
creeper.
Big time. And on the other side, things happen that maybe you didn't anticipate. So for example, they were going to bring the equipment in just on one side of the yard, but they ended up needing to come in on both sides, which meant double the amount of grass repair that happened. We had 2 tracks instead of 1 to repair from all the big equipment. So that wasn't on me for the scope creep. The first stuff was for sure, but is some of those unexpected things. Or another good example this morning, the inspection just came and we failed our inspection because we need some window alarms that we didn't anticipate. So we need to get 16 window alarms along the back side of the house, which are, around $30 each. So there's like $400 or $500 that we didn't anticipate needing to spend because it just wasn't something that was called out in the initial walkthrough when we figured out what we would need. So, some examples.
So what was the percentage? What was the percentage of how off you were?
That I don't know because I didn't track it in the way of trying to figure out before and after. My guess would be somewhere in the $15,000 off range on top of like a $50,000 project. So whatever that percentage is.
That's enough.
Somewhere in there. Big enough where it's definitely impactful. Yes.
I know. I get upset if it's like $1,000 off. Mark, are you getting? I don't know. I've always been right.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because I am right 99.9% of the time, but there was this one time. No, one of the things that we recently had done here at our office is we had a new roof put on. And that was definitely something that costs a lot more than I expected it would cost to put a new roof on this building.
Was this related to the massive, was this the flooding or was that a different office?
No. That was a couple of years ago in a different office. No, this was just an old tired roof that needed to be replaced. So no, but it was a lot more costly than I expected it to be, but also, I like Lori went out and got a variety of bids for doing this work, and I think the most interesting thing is, the project that we ended up spending was probably in the $60,000 range, but I got bids anywhere from like 50 to 110 for the same roof project, effectively. And so I think one of the challenges that I ran into is A, it's cost more than I thought it would, but B, how do I get how do I get a 2x price spread in this project, and how do I, as a person who is not super informed on the best practices of roofing projects, make decisions when I have something that's 50K and that's 100K. What's right, what's wrong, what's better about this, what's worse about that. Is the cheaper one actually better, and the more expensive one I'm just getting taken advantage? Like I don't know, and so sometimes it's hard to really even uncover and understand that.
Yeah, it's interesting that we're all talking about construction things. Mine was related to construction. Me and my wife have always said we're totally comfortable in our house, and we're never house shopping. But there's always this one house that we pass that it always turns our heads, and we love it, and it's like just really like idyllic. So one day we passed it, and it said for sale, and we assumed it would just never be for sale. So I was like, okay, we at least need to look up what they're asking. I said, I know it's going to be way more expensive than our current house, but we could probably swing it. So we got pretty serious about it in the car, talking about it. What would it look like logistically? What school would the kid go to? And so we had almost kind of bought this house in our heads. And then we got home and we looked it up and passed a couple of houses. Boy, they seem like they're more expensive than that one. And then we located the exact address, and it was the house that I passed because it was $2.1 million.
Oh yeah, perfect.
And apparently it's on 10 acres of land that you can't see behind it. And also it's a massive house, and it looks like a ranch or something like that. Anyway, the point is that we have super, super nice taste. And so we may never move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard having that taste. That's kind of annoying.
Yeah. So what's interesting about everything we're saying is that, it's almost like there's hidden costs. There's things you didn't know about. And it's not necessarily that there was something like malicious going on, or that somebody was trying to rip you off. It's mostly that you don't know what you don't know. Right. So, in a lot of products, if I was shopping at Lowe's, or if I was going, if I was at the supermarket or something like that, I could go up to you and say, Mark, how much does this cost? Price check on aisle 2 or something. But in this case, you really can't do that. Mark, what are some of the issues? Why is it that you can't just say this is how much a piece of software costs?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in the business of building custom software, right? And that word custom is, I think, where that all comes down to, right? We're building things that don't exist out in the marketplace. Now, maybe some of the features that you want exist in various forms, but as a whole package, the thing that we're building for any particular client doesn't exist. And so, and we haven't built that before, by the fact of it being custom. And so, every project that we're doing, we're really doing something unique. We're building something that's unique that we haven't built before, that nobody necessarily has built before. And so, being able just to, quickly give an off the cuff price for that is really difficult. There are aspects of every piece of software. You need user management and authentication and stuff like that is pretty common and typical and similar from piece of software to piece of software. So there's some of those things that are really easy for us to give some prices for, or elements of a piece of software to give some pricing for. But overall, it takes time. It takes time to delve into the specifics of what somebody wants to build, what they need. And so it's not necessarily an impossible task to give a price. It's just a time-consuming one that takes some effort to give something that is accurate.
Yeah, which is a total bummer to somebody who's wanting to purchase custom software because they're hopefully sitting there with enough money, or they need to raise money, or something needs to happen. They can't just kind of say, let's build custom software, right? So Laura, talk a little bit about some of those nuances that maybe affect price, because on one end, I think that it's one thing to say, yeah, look, it's custom. You've hired an artist. Is that would you consider yourself? Are you like a Leonardo or something?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
No.
If you hire Leonardo, it's priceless. But I mean, what are the nuances that people are looking at that affect price, and why it's so complicated?
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about construction stuff as our examples, and oftentimes we will use that as an analogy. So if you think about it in those terms, it's like I'm somebody coming and saying, "Hey, I want to build a 4-bedroom house," right? And we've talked about this before, and it's like, how much does a 4-bedroom house cost? Well, based on your house shopping, that a 4-bedroom house
$2.1 million.
right, is at least $2 million. But there's a big range in what a 4-bedroom house should cost. So software is the same way. There's nuances in how we implement each thing. So if you again pulling that analogy and you say, okay, hey, I want to remodel my kitchen. Well, there's all kinds of nuances. Well, what type of countertops do you want? What type of flooring? What level of appliances? How big? All those types of things. And in software, it's the same thing. There are different design and development implementations that we can do that will take a day or 4 days that might address the same challenge of saying, hey, I need a refrigerator. Cool. We can build that feature in 1 day or 4 days. And so some of those nuances really come into play that determine, again, just the cost of it. And I think, referring back to my scope creep of my pool, one thing that I think is pretty common is upfront when you're just working on your paper and you're deciding, all right, what trade-offs I'm going to make. It's easy to say, yeah, you know what, for this feature, I'm going to do the low, simple end. It's just going to be a drop down and we're going to be done, right? And then you're in the software and you're working and you're like, gosh, I really wish this also did a drag and drop and a little animation, or that it actually had an integration with this other tool and would pull in and pre-populate all the data for this drop down, different things, right? So I think the same is true in software, is all those little nuances of not only which features are we going to build, but to what degree are we going to build those. So there's two spectrums there, right? Is like, hey, we can cut out features to cut the price or add features to cut the price. We can also build those features at different levels of execution.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working with a big organization right now that they basically have a whole coaching section that we had planned on putting as part of the software, and but it was very dependent on like coaches being able to deliver on that. So the technology was supposed to be the delivery of the service, but the problem is that the service ended up falling through or being extended or delayed, and so we had to kind of pivot real quick and go, well, let's take this one feature we've built and then make it all about events. Let's make it all about appointment, giving or something like that, which was totally different. And it massively changed the scope. In some cases, it dropped it. And then because we removed that, we felt like we needed to add another thing. So, we're 75% through with the project. So what does that do to the scope? That's an issue. So, Mark, first of all, do you want to add anything to the nuances, or you want to move on?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that one of the other things that often happens in the course of that project, why it can be a little bit tough and nuanced, is, as we start to build things, and like you just talked about, Josh, like things change, right? Plans change, or you build it and you see it, and you actually get to touch it and play with it and use it, and now you want to tweak what you're going to do. And so I think you also have to be, not just like what nuances are there that cause things to cost differently, but you also have to recognize that, you're going to change and evolve. Software is by definition of the word a soft thing. It's not like building a house that it's built and then it's very rigid to change. It's something that's a lot easier to change. Not necessarily cheap, but easier. It's not like you have to tear down a wall and do another thing, but that change is common and often, and one of the things that definitely goes into affecting that price.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were talking about something that a lot of times does affect this, which is the process by which people actually do build the software can majorly affect. I mean, in some cases, you might have a super bloated team with all of this overhead that affects the cost. A lot of people, when they're building a product, they might say, we're going to build it with this really lean kind of bootstrap kind of approach. Lori, can you talk a little bit about the different kinds of processes and maybe how they affect the price?
Yeah. So are you thinking more of the like time and materials versus fixed price, or are you thinking more
Yeah. I mean, what are different ways to do this? Where, I mean, I know that in some cases, to kind of rephrase, you try to predict every single feature that's going to be in there. and then write it all the way out, the likelihood you're completely right, I feel like, is pretty low. But that's what you try to do, and then you try to estimate to that, and then there's other ways to do it. So just talk a little bit about the different ways to to affect the price and
so
the process.
There are two pricing models that we've done both at Mutually Human. One is time and materials, where you're operating on a very agile process, and you're saying, all right, I have this much to spend, and each week what we're doing is saying, all right, what is the most important next thing to build? And that's how you engage with somebody like Mutually Human, and is, all right, you say, all right, we're going to have 10 weeks of build because that's where our budget gives us. And each week you're prioritizing what is going to be worked on, versus another model of saying, hey, I want this chunk of my project to be done. How much does that cost? And in which case, like Mark had referenced, that takes some time and effort to be able to go through and estimate and detail out the features detailed enough that we can give you an estimate. So there's trade-offs for both. On that fixed price world, where you're actually going through and estimating things out, from a business perspective, a lot of times in order to start an engagement, they need a sense of how much is this going to cost, right? And with the time and materials, it's saying like, all right, we'll get done as much as we can get done within your 10-week budget, and we'll continue to reprioritize as we go. And so with that fixed price, you have a little bit more predictability about what you're going to get. On the flip side, though, just like we've been talking about, you're bound to change, right? You're bound to see something and realize, like, I need to shift this. You're bound to learn something different in the marketplace that causes you to want to change that. And that's okay. One thing that if we do enter into that model where we have scoped out a certain set of work, we're very clear upfront about, hey, you're gonna want to change this, and you need to be ready for that. And so, that might result in saying, hey, now that I've learned this, I want to add this feature, and I'm going to take this one out, and doing a little bit of that. There's a little more work in just managing the budget when you get into that world, versus that time and materials. It offers you far more flexibility, and it requires less time on our part to continue to estimate and do change orders or things in that space. And it's more about keeping a more fluid process of really keeping an eye on what's the priority, what do we already have done, what are we still looking at, what do we want to work on next. So there's trade-offs for both. And I mean, we have clients that their business needs put them in one or the other, and both can be effective ways. You have to know the trade-offs going in order to make the best decision on which model works for your organization.
Yeah, like Laura said, I think that the idea of scoping out the whole thing and getting a really clear cost picture, whether you do that once up front or continually over time, like the reality is, I think that a lot of people think is doing that stuff just takes time, right? Like that inherently going through and scoping things out in detail and estimating it takes time and costs money. And so, if I'm going to build the same thing, and in one way, we're just going to sort of build it as we go, and in one way, we're going to scope the whole thing, estimate the whole thing, and then build it. It's going to cost more to do that second one, because we're spending all the time to do that additional deep planning and stuff like that, right? Now, sometimes that can be useful because maybe we'll make different decisions in that planning than we would if we were sort of doing it as we go. But sometimes it can be tough too, because we may end up, as Laura said, planning a bunch of stuff that then as we get into it, we decide, ooh, maybe we don't need this, maybe we don't want to do that, maybe we want to do this differently. And so you've always got to balance sort of the horizon on which you're planning too, because if you go try to plan the next 12 months, what's the likelihood that something's going to change in that plan in the next 12 months, and some amount of your planning and estimation is going to be worthless and going to be not used? Like 100%. But what's the chance that it's going to change if you just plan like the next 1 month out? That seems a lot more likely that you're not going to be wasting time and effort. And so you've got to sort of play this balancing act between like how much planning and insight do we need to have, and how much do we need to just focus on getting things done, and not focus on all that planning.
Yeah, and different organizations have different needs in terms of predictability, right? Like some people might have to answer to certain investors on a regular cadence, and so they need to be able to say, here's what we're going to get done, and here's how much it's going to cost. Other organizations might have more flexibility to be able to monitor that on a weekly basis, so they're staying up to date, but not needing as formalized of a scope and quote. So it just really depends on the needs of the organization.
Yeah, and some projects, some projects are, hey, we have, X thousands of dollars as a budget for this project, and then they need a little bit more clear picture of what the whole is going to cost. And some organizations are more in the perspective of okay, we've got an X thousands of dollars per month budget to invest in building this, and in which case we need to do a very different kind of planning to plan for something like that.
Right. That's one of the things I really like about, we have a KeyQ planner. You can go to mutuallyhuman.com/KeyQ. That's pretty good promo. But it's basically the key questions that you have to ask yourself before you get started with any software. And one of the pieces in there is prioritizing features. That's, a lot of times when I'm working with anybody, or if I'm just doing it myself, there's a difference between vision and then like a minimal viable product, which is, if you ever hear somebody talking about an MVP, which is like the first thing we're going to launch with, what's good enough that kind of solves the initial problem. And there's two things that I see about that is that, one, you have this huge vision and it's every single thing that you've ever seen that you thought was cool, and you're putting it all down in mind maps and all that kind of stuff. And so what I love to do is to take all those kind of things and kind of go, all right, what's essential to the problem that we're solving for the end user? It's these particular things. And that's what I love about that tool is that it helps you do that. So I have a question, and this to both of you guys. We've said that it's unpredictable, right? So we can kind of leave it as that, where if somebody says like, so how much does software cost? You can kind of go, I don't know. That's kind of like, that doesn't help me as someone who's trying to build the software, right? So if it's so unpredictable, what are some things that I can do as somebody that either has a vision or I have a problem that I'm trying to solve for a company, and I know technology is going to be part of that. What can I do to start to predict the range or how much I should be preparing from a financial standpoint?
Yeah, we often tell clients, that range is big, right? We've built, software applications for $50,000 and for $3 million, right? It's a big range to work within. We'll often tell people to plan, plan between typically in the $100,000 to $300,000 range to get a first version of something. You talked about an MVP or something. Now, like some things can be a little bit less than that. Some things are really complex and you necessarily need more than that. But that's still a big range, obviously $100,000 to $300,000, but it starts to give you a sense of scale of where you probably need to be planning to make a meaningful dent at one of your ideas.
You're talking about like a launch candidate, right? Not necessarily like doing something like a prototype or something like that. Yeah. You can have users look at. It could be way less than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I would definitely put that way less. But really ultimately what our recommendation typically is for folks, especially if they need to get some clarity on that. They're not in the I've got $10,000 a month to spend on software. Let's go and let's start getting some stuff done. And they need to have some clarity around what's going to cost. We've really built a pretty robust sort of like scoping and design, really what we call our custom plan engagement, which is meant to very specifically help clarify and identify what the scope of the project's going to be and provide any maybe research or investigation that needs to happen to get an understanding of what needs to happen to build it. And then go through the process of actually estimating it and delivering a sort of a plan of attack. So you think about, I'm going to go build a house. What's one of the first things you're going to do? You're going to go work with an architect and design the house and draw up the plans and get it estimated and priced from a builder and so on and so forth. It's really that stage of software. It's the blueprint, architecting, planning stages of it, so that you're going to spend some money doing that, but that's going to give you clarity on what's coming down the road. And really, like I said, doing that work that is very time-consuming work to do all of that stuff. And so it's really helpful to set aside some time to say, hey, I'm going to necessarily spend some time in that planning and discovery phase of the project to get some clarity on what we're actually going to build and what it's going to cost, so I can plan appropriately for executing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've spent some money launching the MVP. Maybe I've even got all the way to the product launch. Lori, I'll push this to you. One of the issues is that this usually is not a case of if you build it, they'll come. I think we may have talked about this before. It's not, if I have this great product, nobody necessarily knows about it. Nobody's necessarily using it. I may have been wrong about some features that we had, that when people started using it, they were super confused and they don't know how to do it. I've had a lot of humbling experiences like that. And but how does somebody keep the ball rolling to where we're continuing to improve the product, but it doesn't necessarily, without making it a money pit in some way? I mean, you need to have something that's built. And I've seen a lot of cases too, where somebody will get it almost to the finish line and then it doesn't get finished as well because they just run out of money. So how do we keep that from happening? What do you guys have any strategies for that?
A couple strategies come to mind. The first is just making sure that you are doing as much user testing as you can with your time and budget throughout that build process. So not waiting until that launch product and then getting it out there and seeing if users are confused, but just constantly putting small bits in front of people. And you always want to get as close to your target user as possible. But if your budget is low in that aspect and it really is just showing my husband or my neighbor or my friend, like that's okay too. That still gives you a lot of insight, because sometimes as the product owner, you can end up being a little bit too close to it, right? So just doing one strategy is really just ongoing touch points of testing and really figuring out what's working and what's not. And then in terms of making sure it's not a money pit, I mean, a couple things come to mind there is making sure to engage with a quality custom software company like Mutually Human, but where developers are putting tests around it and building the software in a very scalable way, so that when you are looking to add features, it is easy to do, and it is written in a way that allows you to do that with quality and with confidence that you're not introducing new bugs and such. And aside from that, I think it really is, like you said, Josh, one of the biggest things we see is this if I build it, they will come mentality. That's not true. And this is where back to your specialty, right, is making sure that you are not only working towards your plan on what's going to be in your product, but you're working towards how you're going to bring the product to the market or to your company. So we work on both types of projects that are launched externally to customers as well as internally. Either way, you need to have a really good plan of how that's going to roll out to your target users.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go ahead, Mark.
One other thing I think that's important there is to be careful to not spend too much energy trying to build for the future. It's not to say that you don't want to plan for the future or you don't want to consider where you're going to go, but you don't need to build for scalability of 1 billion users from day one. And you don't need to get bogged down with, building features or building flexibility that is too far down the road. Because that is definitely a thing that's going to cause you to spend a lot of money really soon.
What about VR? What about VR, Mark? What about augmented reality for my?
I know, but just wait a minute.
Search software.
Just wait a minute.
So Mark, you said something that made me think of another thing too. Is one of the decision-making points of how you're going to invest your money is using a consultancy or a company like Mutually Human or hiring within. And one of the other things that we've seen is that, again, back to your point of building something and not building too far out. So building something and getting it into the market and starting to learn and starting to generate revenue and being able to have that flexibility to pause on your development investment. Mm-hmm. And so, Mark, I know you have a lot of thoughts on that. Add in.
Yeah, no, I think that is definitely one challenge that we've seen a few customers run into is not taking some time to pause and learn. And so, you should definitely be looking at, let's spend some time and money and energy building something. As you said, Lori, let's test it early and test it often. But once it's actually out there, let's give it some room to breathe in the market and to gain some feedback and to gain some understanding to inform what the next thing we're going to do is. And sometimes that being able to sort of just put an entire pause on the development efforts is a really valuable thing. That's a really hard thing to do if you're, from day one building a big team internally. You've got people full-time on staff on payroll that you've got to keep feeding and keep work coming in to keep them busy. And sometimes that has some unfortunate side effects that you're not taking that time to pause and learn because you have this fixed cost that you're trying to keep busy. Whereas, again, working with someone outside like us can be really valuable in that you can say, cool, we've spent 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is building this thing, and now we're going to set it aside, let it run for 6 months. And maybe we'll have little tweaks to do along the way, but mostly we're going to stop our spend, eliminate our cost of building software for the time being, and spend some time marketing it, selling it, learning about it. And so that can be a really powerful tool to have at your disposal as well.
Yeah, I think that anybody listening to this, I mean, has probably heard of design thinking, but if you're listening to this and you haven't heard of design thinking, maybe right after you're done with this episode, just Google it or take a course or something, because the main idea is to be able to go, you just the amount of assumptions that you have when you have a vision for something or something like that, it's quite a bit. So it's, the idea that you want to put it in front of a user, even if there's the idea of paper prototypes. It's like, hey, we're going to build these kind of things out and see what people think. We're going to sit down, we're going to talk to them. And so every time we get to a little bit next part of the process, like even our feature set, asking people non-leading questions to try to figure out if that would actually be useful to them is a way better idea when it's on paper or when it's like in a prototype than it is, $600,000 down the road when your idea is built, but it doesn't make any sense to anybody. And you have to balance that a little bit because, you got Steve Jobs, who was pretty stubborn anyway, even though he was brilliant. But you got him saying things like, well, people don't know what they want. So there's a little bit of balance where it's like, no, people don't know what you want. And if you ask them, they'll tell you something that was bad that they just got used to. But at the same time, you need to be able to know where users are and try to get insights for that to make decisions on. Now, so there's this idea of, you guys refer to it as the Goldilocks budget, which is crazy cute.
Adorable, right?
It's so adorable. Can you talk a little bit about the Goldilocks budget and how do you get it just right?
Yeah, so we started to develop this seeing customers do two things. One, we would see some customers come along and really not invest enough, invest a too little amount of money to make them impact on what they want to do, right? And so, if you're out to build some new product or affect some sort of change with the software that you're building, there's an amount of investment that you need to do in order to be able to see that through. And so, we saw customers who wanted to do this big thing, and they had $5,000 to do it, and it's not enough for you to make the impact you want to make. And so, honestly, don't spend the $5,000 because it's not going to do anything for you. On the flip side, we would get customers coming to us who out the gate would want to spend $1 million on building something. And like I talked about earlier, that starts to get into the realm of saying, okay, you're going to spend so much money before you start to get feedback and insights in a really valuable way. And so we want to push you to spend actually less money to get a release out, to start testing it and getting feedback and learning from it. And so that's really where this Goldilocks budget came from, is we want to help you find that sweet spot in the middle of not spending too little that you're not going to have the impact that you want, but not spending too much that you're sort of spending out ahead of the learning that you could do, and spend a little bit smarter down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know that in this particular case, you may want to even look at the idea of how creative you can be when you have a lot of resources, because it's a good idea to cast a vision and then go and raise money using that vision, right? The vision a lot of times will raise money, especially if you have like ROI kind of attached to it or a business model attached to it. But what can get kind of scary is if you put a ton of money into something right away, a lot of your innovation can kind of go away because you don't have to be scrappy at all. Some of the companies that are worth billions of dollars right now started with a couple people and them just scrapping it together. And so the idea that you can kind of start there, that you can even kind of work that way with a team like Mutually Human makes a ton of sense. But yeah, it's like I try to find that perfect that perfect amount, which is going to be different for everybody. Do you have anything you want to say about that, Lori?
No, I mean, if I'm going to add anything, it really is when you're making some of those trade-offs, a lot of times, and Mark's really good at this, a lot of times you think that there's a certain feature you need to have in the software, but you may be able to manage that process or that task very easily in something that already exists. So really prioritizing. So for example, one of our projects they're working on right now, we prioritize all the client-facing features. there's a big list of amazing things that we would like to do from the internal side that would help the software run better, but those things can be managed through things like a Google Sheet or something for a period of time, right? There's going to become a point where that will no longer be an effective solution for them. But a lot of times there's multiple things in your idea that can probably start small and very cheap and grow when it needs to, versus I know that someday when I have 1,000 customers that I'll need this feature, but today you have 20. So build for what you need, and wait for those pain points, be just ahead of those major pain points so that you're solving that when you need to, versus, like Mark had mentioned before, over investing in what you think you're going to need for the future.
A good example of that is, say, for example, like you're starting a new software subscription, and even that billing system, right? Do you need a fully automated subscription billing system from day one? Or while you're just getting started and trying to gain your first users, can you say, hey, our form is a simple sign-up form that people can submit their information to, and once they've done, some person has to manually go in and set them up an account and set up their billing stuff manually and stuff like that, right? Like that may be something that, hey, we can save a couple weeks of development time for 10 minutes of effort for each sign up. And obviously that's long term, that's not the thing you want to do. And as you start to grow and scale, that's not going to be the most effective way. But that could absolutely be a really effective way at the outset when the volume is low and as you're starting out small and simple, that you can reduce the cost of that initial implementation while adding a little bit of manual effort that you can then look at revisiting when you start to scale, and when you start to have the revenue and income from the software doing this, that manual process becomes a bottleneck, but now you have the income coming in to help support that additional functionality.
And to Mark's point, a lot of times we can do that without customers, without taking away a good customer experience, right? Like as a customer, I'm filling out the same form I would fill out if this was a fully integrated billing system, right? Like I don't necessarily have a different experience in that example. And so a lot of times making some of those trade-offs doesn't always mean reducing the quality of your customer's experience. So, that's something that you can work with, talk through different trade-offs with whomever is building, and a good product person will really help you make some of those decisions and trade-offs there.
And they don't always have to be the kind of low level spreadsheets and things like that. Sometimes they can, but there's, half the time if you go and look at the features that you're wanting, as long as the front layer experience is represents the brand well and represents the experience that you're trying to do, there are lots of back-end services that probably do what you do. Now, eventually you may want to make those custom or they don't fit your needs completely, but being able to say, okay, we'll handle these 6 with pre-made services already, on the back end, I think makes perfect sense. Well, okay, I think this was a really, really effective conversation. Listen, if you are listening to this and you're sitting there with an idea, or that your company is about to have to invest in a big software project, take some time to work with people that have done it before, and maybe you've done it before. But one thing that Mutually Human has is a free consultation. So, and they have lots of different versions. We didn't talk about this earlier, but can you talk about just a little bit, a minute or so, Lori, about the different kinds of consultations you guys do depending on the situation that's needed?
Yeah. Start the stopwatch. So we get customers that come into Mutually Human with all different needs, right? And some people might be on the spectrum of, I just have this idea and I'm not really sure how much this will cost. Is this feasible? Where is this at? All the way down, to somebody who maybe has a project that they've actually outlined certain bullets of it. This is exactly how I want it to work. And so we have a big range of people that come to us. So based on that, we have different free consultations that we can offer. If you have an existing product that you want us to take a look at and provide some ideas and costs on how to improve them, or if you just have a really vague idea and you want to talk through and help shape that idea into something actionable. So yeah, there's a wide range of different consultations we can do based on where you're at in your software journey.
Yeah, and there's really no point in doing those on your own, because there's really no commitment. It's just working with a team that's only built a few pieces of software that can help you get these going. So we actually have a really cool tool on the site. If you go to mutuallyhuman.com, you can see take a little quiz. It'll help kind of figure out where you're actually at in the process, and then tell you which one of those consultations would be the right one for you. So I'd encourage you to do that. So thanks a lot, everybody, for listening to this podcast. Thanks, Mark and Lori, for all of the wisdom and the Goldilocks budget principle. If you guys want more content like this, you can go to mutuallyhuman.com/resources. Like we said, there's KeyQ, there's lots of things that are available there, lots of articles. And then obviously, you can do your free consultation there at mutuallyhuman.com. So thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next time, and stay human.